So we've talked about your innate immune system and your lymphatic system. We're going to do the other branch of your immune system now, which is the is your adaptive immunity, or like I had just finished up the last video, in a previous version of the textbook, it was called the acquired immune system or acquired immunity. And so either one of those words, we're talking about the same thing. Sometimes the vocabulary just gets changed up, and you might notice inconsistencies in the videos or something like that. So just as a disclaimer, we're talking about the same thing here. And I'll try and use the right word that is cohesive with your textbook. And so basically this second branch of our immune system, we're going to talk about antibodies, we're going to talk about vaccines and all of the stuff that you might have thought about when we talked or when you thought about your immune system. So the innate immune system was non-specific, where the adaptive immune system is specific and it counters specific invaders differently. The other difference is your innate immune system you are born with. The adaptive immune system, or sometimes called the acquired immune system, you're developing throughout your life. And so basically, the more things you encounter and the more immune responses you develop in your body, the stronger your adaptive immunity is. And so basically what your adaptive immunity does is respond to foreign molecules, and these foreign molecules might be pathogens, right? Those disease-causing organisms, but they also might be like that infamous peanut that I was talking about. So something that is just non-self, that is not you, we call an antigen. So a peanut isn't necessarily going to cause a disease, but it might spur an immune response in you. So antigens it's in the video, they're antibody generators. I don't know if you an antigen, get it? Antigen. Maybe antigen has Kyle as her son. I don't know. Sorry for the bad jokes. I usually save those for in person. So basically antigens are are molecules on the surface of pathogens or any molecule. So again, all the different things that could be antigens. They could be viruses, they could be bacteria, they could be mold spores, they could be the wrong kind of blood, they could be anything really, pollen, a peanut. Any of those kind of things are going to create antibodies in you. So the adaptive immune system reacts to antigens and remembers them. So it keeps a bit of a log. It's like a response that you have once, and then your body is primed. And so you don't have, you know, you get the cold virus once and you don't get the cold the second time when your immune system is already primed for that. Or you get the vaccination for the chickenpox virus and you don't get chickenpox. So you could either be infected with chickenpox or be vaccinated with the chickenpox vaccine. Both of those trigger active immunity because your body is making antibodies for that. So it's what we often think of as our immune system, right? So passive immunity, again, part of adaptive immunity, it's going to talk about antibodies, which I said are part of the adaptive immune response in people. But it's not your body creating the antibodies itself. And so if you are injected with pre-made antibodies or antibodies that come from from mother to fetus, then that's considered passive immunity. You're not doing anything. Your cells are not creating the antibodies themselves. And so that would be passive immunity. So oftentimes we think that getting a vaccination is passive, but it is not, because on the cellular level, it is making your cells of your immune system trigger an immune response. That's what's protecting you from the chickenpox virus or the flu virus or potentially the COVID-19 virus. Here we are back to a picture that we've actually seen before. So this is a slide that I pulled from our circulatory system. And now that we've gone through the immune system just a little bit, we can have a better understanding of the different kinds of leukocytes, or the different kinds of white blood cells. And so we talked about, the phagocytes. And one of the examples of the phagocytes, and again, I'm back into the innate immune system here, was the neutrophil. There are two kinds of leukocytes in the acquired immune system. Sorry, I said the wrong word. Adaptive immune system. And the fancy name for the white blood cells of the adaptive immune system are called lymphocytes. And there's two different kinds. We could have B cells and T cells. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those lymphocytes, the leukocytes of the adaptive immune response. The B cells come from the bone marrow. Isn't that appropriate? B from the bone. And this is why the bone marrow was labeled on that lymphatic system diagram. And the T cells come from your thymus. And the thymus is an organ right underneath your breastbone, basically. In the center of your ribs. And so in that organ, that's where the T cells are going to come from. So the B cells, you've been waiting for it, are what actually create antibodies. And so antibodies are such a big concept or something that you might be bringing with you of knowledge about the immune system already, that this is where they show up. They don't show up anywhere else in the immune system. So the B cells come from the bone marrow and they're the ones that make antibodies. The B cells are part of another branch. And so if you notice how things are branching, we branched to innate and adaptive immune system. And then the adaptive immune system is going to branch into the humoral immune response and the cell-mediated immune response. So we've got this idea that is a bit of a flowchart, or I see that in my head anyway, as a bit of a concept map, if you will, to kind of understand the relations of these different concepts. And so the humoral immune response is antibody mediated. So an antibody is basically generated from an antibody generator. And it's basically just a tiny little protein that has a few different mechanisms that all basically prevent the action of pathogens. So in these ones, we'll talk more about this in a coming slide. Generally, the other branch of the adaptive immune system is the cell-mediated immune response. So this is when the humoral immune response, sorry, I misspoke, is when the just the humerus, just the fluids of the body have an antigen in them. So if that antigen has actually invaded a cell, right, this is the cell-mediated immune response. So basically the T cells have like cell-to-cell combat. So up here you have no cellular infections, but down here you do have cellular infections. The B cells and the T cells are what you're generating throughout your life. So you have millions of kinds of B cells and T cells, and each one has a different membrane receptor, so a different protein in their plasma membranes that are specific to invaders to your body. And basically, these B cells and T cells are going to wait in the lymphatic system where they can then respond to any invaders. So these are the two branches of the adaptive immune response. I'm really going to try and use the right word. So adaptive immune response. And so you could have the humoral immune response or the cell-mediated immune response. And the big thing that we're talking about here are the lymphocytes, the B cells and the T cells. And so here you have the B cells being made by the bone marrow. And these are, like I said, the antibody generators. So you make antibodies over here. The other side here would be the cell-mediated response. So this is when a cell is actually infected. And the other kind of lymphocytes would be called T cells, and they're the cell-to-cell combat. So this would be cell-to-cell fighting, where this is no infection of the cells, but there's an invader in the fluid, in the humerus of the body, fluid of the body. So those are the two branches of our adaptive immune response. Those are the two white blood cells that are specific to our adaptive immune response. We've got the B cells in our humoral immune response, and I think humerus, and that's your funny bone. That's how I remember. And then the T cells are from the thymus, and they're the cell-to-cell combats. You actually have killer T cells, and so that's how I think of it. When we get into the T cells, that's what killer T cells would fight cell-to-cell. They'd be combative. That's the way I remember these. So here we have the two different response. So here we have the B cells making antibodies, which are going to bind to any antigens and get rid of them. And here we have the cell-to-cell combat. And so you have a T cell as part of the cell-mediated immune response. Again, the B cells and T cells are lymphocytes, which are the leukocytes of the adaptive immune response. So many words. Okay, let's see if I can keep doing this. So the humoral immune response, I like the picture of this a little bit better. This is divided up into the primary response and the secondary immune response. So again, with adaptive immunity, we could have active immune response. So this would be getting a cold or getting the chickenpox virus or getting the vaccine for the chickenpox or getting a flu shot or whatever. And so what happens is you have B cells that respond to the antigen. And so here's that first encounter with the antigen, and that's going to stimulate or activate the B cells. And so the B cells do one of two things. So this is cloning that happens. So we had a rapid cell division of those B cells. And some of the cells become plasma cells or effector cells. And plasma cells' key job is to pump out as many antibodies as it can. So when you've pumped out all these antibodies, that's how your body is going to fight off whatever it is. It's the generation of these antibodies that gives you immunity. It gives you the protection from getting the chickenpox virus. You also, in this cloning that happens of the B cells, they're not all plasma cells or all effector cells or all antibody making cells. Some of them are memory cells. And so those memory cells lay in wait. So all of this is your primary immune response. So that's your first exposure to the chickenpox, or it's the vaccination with the chickenpox vaccine. And so now that you have those memory cells all primed, then another exposure to the chickenpox or something, you're protected. You don't get the chickenpox. Your body still mounts a secondary immune response, but it means you don't get whatever that disease was that could be potentially dangerous. And so again, you're going to pump out plasma cells and memory cells. And you know, again, we've got more antibody generating from those B cells. So we have the primary immune response, and I said it makes plasma cells or effector cells that make the antibodies, or the memory cells. It's slower than the secondary immune response, and the example of this is exposure to chickenpox or the chickenpox vaccine. Like I said, both of those are active immunity. If you were just to get antibodies pumped into you, that's passive immunity. It can protect you, but it's not the same as your body being stimulated and these B cells making the antibodies for themselves. So the secondary immune response, you never really notice in you. This is you just not getting chickenpox again. And so what happens in that secondary immune response, it's a much quicker response, and it just activates those memory cells. And again, they clone into the plasma cells and more memory cells. And so it's faster and stronger. And so you don't get the chickenpox. I mean, theoretically, we could do this about any vaccine that you get. This is how vaccines work. So antibodies are the weapons of the humoral immune response. They're just little tiny proteins. They're such powerful things. So we know that they're secreted by those plasma or effector B cells. They're secreted into the blood and the lymph. So an antibody is just a little Y-shaped protein, and it has two spots where it could bind with the antigen. And it's specific to the antigen that's caused its creation. So just like enzymes were little proteins and they were shape specific, antigens are the same. They're little proteins and they're shape specific. So antibodies promote antigen elimination through several mechanisms. And we're not going to get into them too much. The one video, the that's posted does talk about these a little bit more, but basically all of them cause, death or destruction of the antigens. And so it doesn't really matter how it works. The fact that antigens are key in all of these processes that basically help your body get rid of any antigen or dispose of it. So we're done with the humoral response. We're done with the B cells. We're going to move on to the cell-to-cell combat or the cell-mediated immune response. And so again, just to recap, we're still part of the adaptive immune system. The T cells were part of that cell-to-cell bit or the cell-mediated immune response. So we could have helper T cells or we could have cytotoxic T cells, that idea that they're like killer cells or they're like fight cell to cell. So the helper T cells are very helpful. They're very helpful if you're trying to kind of like keep everything separate. They're actually not so helpful. So the helper T cells do two different things. They're going to recognize any cells that are antigen presenting cells, and they're going to do two things. So they're going to activate, where is it? So they stimulate the humoral response and they also stimulate other T cells. So the helper T cells are going to light up the cytotoxic T cells and they're also going to light up the B cells of the humoral immune response. So it was great. I was in my mind, I'm painting this kind of flow chart or picture of how we've got these different branches, but then the helper T cells go in and there's a bit of a web developing here. So the key thing with these cytotoxic T cells is that they're the ones that are going to do the dirty work. They're going to be the ones that fight cell to cell and basically destroy the infected cell. So here we have this image. So we have a cell that is infected and it has an antigen presenting part of it. So it's, I think in the one video, he talks about how like these cells are like they're throwing out the white flag or whatever. So the helper T cell recognizes this white flag. It recognizes this sign that this cell has been infected. And it says, okay, I am going to help you. And it does two different things. It switches on B cells and stimulates the humoral immune response. And it also stimulates the other T cells of the cell-to-cell combat or the cell-mediated immune response, the cytotoxic T cells, for them to kind of um, do the dirty work. This number 5, and this doesn't happen a lot in biology, so I put it in as a bit of a note, is a positive feedback loop. So this allows this response. The helper T cells can work quickly because they actually generate more helper T cells in the process as well. So this is a picture of those cell-to-cell fighters, the cytotoxic T cells. I think I called them killer T cells, if you want to call them that. And basically what they're going to do is literally interact with that infected cell to destroy that infected cell. And so they're the only T cells that can actually kill infected cells rather than just helping other components of the immune system do that work. So I started out the chapter with this. the main job of your immune system is to react against anything that is not recognized as part of you. And so when we talked about genetics, we talked about different blood types. And when we talked about blood types, I said the different blood types are named for the markers that are on your red blood cells. And so type O had no markers. So they're called the universal donor because they literally have no markers for other people's body's immune systems to react to and see as non-self. Whereas my blood type, I'm the mean one, I have both A and B markers. So when I give to somebody that's type A, they recognize my B markers as a problem and they're going to attack my blood. If I give to someone who is type A blood, then they're going to recognize my, sorry, which way did I say it? So if I give to an A, they're going to have problem with my B markers. If I give to a B, they're going to have trouble with my A markers. And heaven help me, if I give to a type O person, they have no markers. And so they're going to respond to my blood like it's an invader. They would recognize my blood as not being them. It's non-self. And so they're going to mount an immune response against my blood. And so that's what we're talking about with this fingerprint. And so it's not just blood, but it could also be organs, can be rejected if we don't match the genetics and match these markers in the tissues that are being donated. So donors are often most closely matched because that does limit the chance of rejection. So transplants between identical twins wouldn't have this problem. If you could clone organs of your own genetic makeup, you wouldn't have that problem. Or the other way that this gets addressed is if you do have tissue that's not yours or doesn't match 100%, then immunosuppressant drugs are going to prevent your immune system from doing its job. And the danger with this is that it also prevents your immune system from protecting you against the things that actually would cause you harm. And so it keeps you from rejecting the donated tissue, these drugs, but they could also, because your immune system is suppressed, open you up to other infections because your immune system isn't working properly. So our immune systems are powerful and they are awesome, but they also sometimes get a little bit funny. And so there are unfortunately diseases where your immune system gets a little bit confused and it attacks your own tissues like they are you, which is obviously a problem. So if we go through, we'll also address these other ones in order. So I'll come back to them because each have their own slides. So autoimmune diseases, an example of that would be type 1 diabetes, where your body actually goes into your pancreas and attacks the cells that are making insulin. There's no reason for doing this, but that's what your immune system does, and that's what causes the disease of diabetes. There's other ones. So rheumatoid arthritis, again, it's your body attacking your own tissues, which obviously doesn't make sense, and it's like an overactive immune system basically because it's responding to things that it shouldn't respond to. Lupus is another example, and multiple sclerosis. So multiple sclerosis affects your nervous tissue, but all of those are examples of autoimmune diseases, and probably all of us know someone who suffers from an autoimmune disease because they're unfortunately rather common. So the other thing you could have is a depressed or an ineffective immune system. So if you have a deficient immune system, I mean, most of us have felt this. So if you go through a breakup or getting a new job or, maybe exams, that idea that your immune system can be weakened just by those physical or environmental stresses. The other thing, there are diseases that suppress your immune system. So AIDS is an example of that. AIDS stands for acquired immune deficiency syndrome, where basically immune components are lacking and your immune system isn't working. It's almost the opposite of the autoimmune diseases, right? Where the autoimmune diseases are doing stuff they shouldn't do. Immunodeficiency diseases just aren't doing those things because they don't have the right stuff to mount a strong immune response. Many of us suffer from allergies, and allergies are again, just your immune system doing what it's supposed to do, but it responds to things that are not pathogen. It responds to pollen like it's going to cause a disease in you, and pollen's not going to cause a disease in you, but your body responds and are hypersensitive or exaggerated in its immune response to different allergens or antigens in our environment. So most of us again have an experience with an allergy, whether it be pollen or dust or cats or whatever it is. It's usually a pretty quick response, and it doesn't have to be a large amount of that allergen for you to have an allergic reaction. We typically know what allergic reactions look like because they are so common. So it could be parts of your respiratory system or digestive system. It could be your skin. Basically, any of those components I think we've all seen either in ourselves or in people that we're close to. So this is just an image explaining how allergic reactions work, and they really are, overblown responses to something that is not a pathogen. Yes, it's an antigen, but it's an almost illogical response, and your body's doing just maybe too good a job at mounting an immune response. If you want to stop your immune response, you take antihistamines. If you remember that histamine was part of our inflammatory response. So histamine was a hormone that caused leakiness in those capillaries or blood vessels. And so an antihistamine is going to interfere with histamine's action and basically no inflammation then, right? It's going to stop that process. Oops. And so they do provide temporary relief. There's different mechanisms that anti-allergy medications work. Sometimes they work on mast cells and sometimes they work on the histamine receptors. But yeah, oftentimes they do make you drowsy. The extreme of an allergy is anaphylactic shock. So again, unfortunately, several of us do know people who are anaphylactically allergic to, say, a nut or shellfish or something like that. They can be extreme. They can be incredibly quick. They're super scary to be around, but could be potentially life-threatening. And this is where you have the EpiPens or just epinephrine, which is what is in an EpiPen. Your textbook does a few other extensions of this, and I won't spend a lot of time on these, but I do think that understanding our immune system is such a key component to understanding human health and wellness. This is a concept, this is a hygiene hypothesis that's been floated. It's actually something that's new to your textbook with this printing. And basically it says, your immune system can be stronger if you expose it to more things. And so what they're saying is that frequent childhood infections or exposure, maybe eating dirt like this image is of, can lead to a healthy adult immune system. So the cell-mediated immune response, needs to practice to develop properly. And if you don't have proper development, you might have allergies or this idea that you overcompensate. So again, it's just a hypothesis. They're still working on it. I know even in dietary allergies, the thoughts on like when you introduce dairy to a baby's diet or peanuts or whatever, these things are constantly evolving, and it's like the message I got when my kids were born are different than the messages that are being given to parents now. So I think it's ever evolving. And again, just reminding ourselves that science is a process and we're still working on some of this. Our understanding of diseases in humans is growing as well. And this last slide, just to kind of round out this chapter, is talking about how some pathogens are super wily and seemingly evade our immune system. And so there's a lot going on, and unfortunately in the world right now we have COVID-19, and understanding our immune system can really help us sort of digest the information that's coming at us from the media and that's related to our own health and wellness.